1. NATO launches Eastern Sentry to deter Russia. In response to a series of airspace violations by Russian drones over Poland and the Baltic states, NATO launched a large-scale defensive operation named Eastern Sentry. Troops and hardware from the UK, Germany, France, and Denmark have been deployed to Poland, Lithuania, and Romania. The mission is meant to signal NATO's unity and readiness in deterring further Russian aggression, particularly after increased fighting in Ukraine's Kharkiv region. The action falls short of invoking Article 5, but is a direct military buildup along NATO's eastern borders. Why it matters. This is the most assertive NATO movement since 2022, escalating tensions in Eastern Europe. 2. China's 80th Victory Day parade signals power projection. On the 3rd of September, China held its largest military parade in a decade to mark the 80th anniversary of Japan's surrender in World War II. President Xi Jinping oversaw the event, which included demonstrations of hypersonic missiles, AI drones, and naval strike systems. Leaders like Vladimir Putin, Russia, and Kim Jong-un, North Korea, attended, underlining a growing anti-Western alliance. Western leaders boycotted the parade, and NATO condemned it as provocative. Why it matters. China is increasingly displaying military confidence amid rising global tensions with the West, particularly over Taiwan and the South China Sea. 3. Nepal's Gen Z protests force PM resignation. Nepal witnessed massive youth-led protests starting in late August, escalating in early September. The protesters, mainly Gen Z, opposed government corruption, internet censorship, and youth unemployment. On the 9th of September, PMKP Sharma Oli resigned after multiple cities saw violent clashes. By 12th of September, at least 50 people were confirmed dead, and Sushila Karki, a respected former Chief Justice, was appointed interim PM. Internet and social media were temporarily shut down. Why it matters. This is Nepal's largest civil unrest since 2006. It highlights growing political consciousness among South Asia's youth and their power to reshape leadership. 4. Bolsonaro sentenced to 27 years in Brazil. Brazil's Supreme Federal Court sentenced former President Jair Bolsonaro to 27 years in prison on the 11th of September. He was found guilty of orchestrating a failed coup attempt in early 2023 following his defeat in the 2022 elections. Evidence showed coordination between Bolsonaro, military officers, and right-wing influencers to overturn the election. Celebrations and protests erupted across Brazil, reflecting the nation's political divide. Why it matters. This is an unprecedented move in Latin American politics and could influence how populist leaders are treated in other democracies. 5. Key national elections around the world. 1 Sep. President Irfan Ali won re-election as the People's Progressive Party retained power amid economic growth tied to offshore oil discoveries. Jamaica, 5 Sep. The ruling Jamaica Labour Party, JLP, won a third consecutive term. PM Andrew Holness announced new social reforms. Norway, 8 Sep. A center-left red-green coalition won parliamentary elections, ending a brief conservative resurgence. Why it matters. These elections signal global voter preferences shifting towards economic stability and social welfare, with some countries reinforcing existing governments. 6. Poland invokes NATO Article 4 over drone incursions. After repeated airspace violations by Russian drones, Poland invoked Article 4 of the NATO Treaty, which allows any member to request formal consultations when it feels threatened. The move stopped short of military retaliation, but indicated growing regional insecurity. NATO leaders met in Brussels and pledged increased surveillance and air defense systems for Poland and the Baltics. Why it matters. Article 4 is rarely used, showing the seriousness of Poland's concerns. It adds pressure on NATO to act without escalating to war. 7. Israeli airstrikes in Qatar sparked global backlash. On the 7th of September, Israel launched airstrikes in Doha, Qatar, allegedly targeting Hamas operatives involved in attacks on Israeli civilians. The strike caused civilian casualties and damaged diplomatic buildings, prompting international outrage. Qatar recalled its ambassador and demanded UN action. The EU is considering sanctions on Israel, though divisions exist among member states. Israel also conducted further strikes in Yemen, deepening regional instability. Why it matters. This could trigger a major diplomatic rupture between Israel and Gulf states, especially Qatar, which has been mediating ceasefires in Gaza. 8. Global markets surge on U.S. Fed rate cut expectations. Markets worldwide rallied in early September due to a weaker-than-expected U.S. inflation report, raising hopes that the Federal Reserve might cut interest rates soon. The Nikkei and Hang Seng indices hit yearly highs. Oil and commodity prices also rose, boosted by renewed demand forecasts. Investors poured money into emerging markets, especially in Asia and Latin America. Why it matters. A potential Fed rate cut could boost global liquidity, ease debt pressure on developing nations, and spur a wave of economic optimism. 9. U.S. Secretary of State Rubio to visit Israel. Amid strained U.S.-Israel relations following the Qatar airstrike, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is scheduled to visit Israel from 13 to 18 September. The visit is seen as a balancing act, supporting Israel's security while urging restraint in military operations abroad. Rubio is also expected to meet with Palestinian Authority officials in the West Bank. Why it matters. This is Rubio's most high-stakes diplomatic trip since taking office in 2025 and will set the tone for U.S. Middle East policy. 10. OPEC Plus to raise oil output slightly. On 10th of September, OPEC Plus, led by Saudi Arabia and Russia, announced it would increase oil production by 137,000 barrels a day starting in October. The decision follows months of tight supply and high prices. It is aimed at preventing overheating while responding to global demand and geopolitical pressure from energy importing countries.